If you'd told me a year ago that the biggest fight of my adult life would start with a cup of coffee and a cracked fence, I probably would have laughed, right? But there I was, barefoot on my porch, mug in hand, still rocking pajama pants and slippers that didn't match when I saw this obnoxious orange paper stapled right to my old wooden fence. At first I thought it had to be some kind of prank, maybe a bored teenager's idea of fun. But then I got close and man, the HOA letterhead hit me in the face like a court summons violation 14B immediate eviction proceedings. Reason broken fence panel. I almost spit out my coffee, not because it was funny, but because it was just so ridiculous. I'd survived layoffs, a flooded basement, and even a kitchen fire. But apparently the thing that would finally do me in was one crooked piece of lumber. And that's when I spotted her, Karen Withers, the self-appointed neighborhood queen, standing across the street in her robe and pearls, just beaming like she'd conquered Rome. She gave me a little wave. I raised my mug and saluted right back. She mouthed, "You're done." I just smirked. She had no clue what she'd started. The wild thing about the whole fence crisis was that it wasn't even broken. Not really. Sure, it had a crack near the bottom rail and leaned a bit after a gnarly storm a couple weeks back, but I'd already ordered the parts and planned to fix it that weekend. Karen didn't wait. By that evening, there were 3 HOA board members patrolling my property line like they were running a sting operation. One of them even whipped out a level and gave this dramatic gasp like he'd discovered a body. They took pictures, scribbled notes, pointed fingers. If you listened hard enough, you'd think my fence was about to bring down the property values for the whole county. That night, a printed envelope got hand-delivered to my door. Not mailed, hand-delivered. Said I was in violation of community codes and had to vacate within 10 days or face eviction. I honestly thought I was being punked, kept waiting for a camera crew to jump out and tell me I'd made it onto some HOA version of a prank show. No such luck. I called the HOA office, and guess who picked up? Karen herself. Her voice sounded calm, but there was this smug edge. "We're just enforcing the rules," she said. "If we let your fence stand, it lowers the value for the whole street." I said, "It's a fence, not a sinkhole." She hung up. The next morning, Gary, the so-called compliance officer, zoomed by on his Segway, looking like he was guarding the Pentagon. He paused, tapped the panel with his foot, nodded in satisfaction, and snapped a few pictures. Margot, another board member, wandered by with a clipboard and a Bluetooth headset, whispering into it like she was reporting me to the feds. It was pure theater, and honestly, I might have laughed if it wasn't so petty. But Karen wasn't done. Suddenly, I was getting citations for improper mulch coloration and unapproved garden gnome design. Never mind that I didn't even own a garden gnome. She hit me with a fine for overgrown hedges the same week I'd had a crew trim them. It became crystal clear this wasn't about the fence. This was about power, and Karen had picked me as her new target. So I did what any mildly annoyed, slightly vindictive adult would do. I started reading. I pulled up every amendment bylaw and annual report in the HOA's history. It was mind-numbing, but I found a clause from the 90s that said anyone holding a majority voting interest in the management trust could motion for a board restructuring. In plain English, if you controlled enough shares, you could force an election. Digging deeper, I found out the HOA was run through a private trust and shares had been quietly sold years ago. Some of those shareholders still lived here or their families did. I used to work in corporate real estate, so let's just say I knew what I was looking at, and what I saw was leverage. I started reaching out quietly. Mr. Price, who'd once been fined for leaving his garage open during the day. The Wilsons, whose daughter's birthday balloons had been labeled visual clutter. I asked questions, listened, and tracked down who still had the power to vote. 3 of them held controlling interests. 2 wanted Karen out. The third, Mrs. Halverson, told me Karen had once called animal control because her cat looked too aggressive. I couldn't make this stuff up. That weekend, Karen ramped things up another letter, now threatening civil damages if the fence wasn't fixed. She had no idea I'd already lit the fuse under her little kingdom. And while Karen and her lapdog strutted around acting like the world's worst security patrol, something in the neighborhood shifted. Other folks started getting hit too. Mr. Lee got fined for his grandkids using sidewalk chalk. A single mom got threatened because her car had a little dust on it. People started shutting their garage doors, keeping curtains drawn. Kids stopped playing outside. Karen wasn't enforcing rules anymore, she was ruling by fear. That's when I realized if I wanted things to change, I couldn't just fight for myself. So I hosted a barbecue disguised as an underground resistance meeting. Invited everyone who'd ever tangled with Karen. Mr. Price showed up in sunglasses like he was entering witness protection. The Wilsons brought photos of Margot taking pictures of their holiday decorations. Even the new couple on Maple came confused but game. As the sun went down, the stories poured out, adults talking about being screamed at for the wrong color mulch or threatened with legal action for a misplaced lawn chair. What hit me wasn't how crazy it was, but how scared people were, grown adults tiptoeing around one woman and her laminated handbook. When the moment was right, I told them what I'd found. Showed them the trust, the voting shares, the possibility of a new board. At first they just stared like, is this real? But when I pulled out the actual documents, the energy shifted. Mr. Price straightened up. The Wilsons leaned in. Even the shy woman from Birch Lane piped up, asking how she could help. We started working. People reached out to other shareholders. Others gathered stories and documented every petty threat and citation. One neighbor had security footage of Karen measuring flower pots. Another had audio of her ranting about color integrity over a kid's birthday banner. The final straw came when Karen fined Joe, a Vietnam vet, for having a weathered American flag. That flag had been folded by his commanding officer when he retired. She fined him $300, threatened a lien. At that point, it wasn't just about fences or flags anymore, it was about respect. So we called an emergency meeting. Signatures were lined up, documents prepared. I drafted the paperwork for a special board election, airtight, by the book. When Karen got the motion, she tried to stall, but the neighborhood had turned. When she tried to defend herself on the online forum, residents piled on with photos, voicemails, even a recording of her berating a disabled vet about lawn signs. The election was a landslide. Karen's allies Margot and Gary jumped ship. The rest of us got to work, first by suspending all HOA fines and enforcement, then by digging through Karen's financials. It was uglier than we thought. Thousands spent on board retreats, designer office furniture, even a portable hot tub for board therapy. We filed a formal complaint. I finalized the trust between shares I'd acquired, and neighbors who joined. We had 60% of the vote. I restructured the management company and fired Karen, Gary, and Margot in one go. We didn't keep it quiet. Held a public meeting, invited the whole community. Karen showed up in red, tried to take the floor, but the room wasn't with her anymore. I calmly read out every questionable expense, and with the new documents, officially ended her reign. The applause drowned out Gary's complaints. People shared their stories. Some cried. Others just smiled for the first time in ages. A week later, Karen's house was for sale. Gary vanished. Margot resigned. We set about rebuilding, created new committees, set up a digital portal so everyone could see where the money went, scrapped pointless rules. The biggest change: the neighborhood felt alive again. Kids playing, laughter on the lawn, sidewalk, chalk everywhere. But then came the real twist. 2 weeks after our victory, the county launched a full audit. Turns out Karen hadn't just wasted HOA funds she'd forged. Board signatures, faked votes, manipulated minutes. The county sheriff handed her a subpoena right at her door. The local paper ran her mug with a headline about embezzlement. Her house sat empty, unsellable, her name now a warning, not a threat. With her gone, we held a block party. First time in years, everyone came out. No rules, no fines, just neighbors. We even burned a pile of old violation notices in a fire pit and unveiled a new charter, fair, transparent, made by the people who actually live here. A month later, Karen pled guilty to most charges, no jail but restitution, and banned from serving on any HOA board for a decade. Her restitution funded a new playground and a community garden, no permits, no inspections, just joy. Late one night, I walked past that same fence, still cracked, still leaning, now with a little brass plaque. The fence that fired a tyrant. Mr. Price wandered over with a cold lemonade, sat beside me, and said, "You ever imagine all this starting from a busted board?" I grinned. Sometimes the biggest battles start with the smallest cracks. He laughed. Kids zipped by on scooters, flags waved, and for once I felt proud to call this place home. So let me ask you, was I wrong to fight back, or is standing up to bullies like Karen exactly what neighborhoods need? Share your thoughts. Below, what would you have done if it were your fence, your home, your freedom on the line?